They said I would end up with nothing and be shipped to a nursing home. And the room went so quiet, I could hear the antique clock counting out my life in seconds. Lyra's nails tapped the mahogany like a metronome of contempt, while my son stared at the table as if it could answer for him. Then the lawyer's mouth curved just a hint, almost an act of mercy. He set a heavy envelope on the desk and said my husband had left instructions for a moment exactly like this. I felt the old strength I thought I had buried rise, thin as a match flame, but stubborn against the draft. My name is Glenda, 59, a widow who once worked double shifts, studied at night, and taught a boy to tie his shoes and face thunder without fear. After Richard died, grief turned my muscles to sand, and Lyra saw the beach before the tide. She and Darren moved in temporarily, then rearranged the kitchen, the house, and finally the story about who I was. My husband's chipped coffee mug vanished under the pretext of hygiene. Our photographs were replaced by art that didn't know our names. I called it help because I needed the lie to breathe. And every day, the house felt a little less like mine. The meeting at the lawyer's office was supposed to be routine clarifications, signatures, civility. Instead, Lyra renamed my home ours and spoke of a lovely little facility with bingo nights, as if the word lovely could disguise the cruelty. Darren sat beside her and measured his courage in glances that never reached my face. Around us, relatives watched like spectators who don't wish to be caught cheering. Their silence was a soft, treacherous tide. I wanted to stand and list the receipts of motherhood pneumonia nights, Sunday pancakes, scraped knees, graduation day, but motherhood is a ledger that never persuades those who won't look. When Lyra announced they had already paid a deposit for my placement, something in me went still, a lake in winter. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat, and the room shifted toward him. He said Richard had left a sealed document to be opened only if I was threatened with removal or mistreated by family. Lyra laughed, brittle as glass carried too far. But her eyes flickered when he crossed to the safe. He returned with a manila envelope sealed in red wax. My name written in Richard's careful hand. 3 months before he died, he had dated it. He had known. The wax cracked like a knuckle, and out slid a letter, a set of legal papers, and a small disc. The television on the credenza hummed awake, blue and indifferent, until Richard's face appeared thinner. Yes, but unmistakable, a presence even beyond breath. He looked straight into the camera with the patient seriousness he kept for stubborn bolts and family problems. If you are watching this, sweetheart, then someone is trying to take advantage of you, and I have made sure that will not happen. The sentence landed like a plank across a chasm, something solid between me and the drop. Shame rolled across the table in waves. Darren's shoulders tightened. Lyra's smile frayed. The lawyer adjusted the volume, but it was not the volume that needed adjusting. It was the story we had all been telling. Richard spoke of noticing what grief can disguise, the way a voice can be lowered to cut deeper, the way help can arrive with an itemized bill attached to your dignity. He said he had seen plans being made in corridors and kitchens, arrangements drafted as if I were an inconvenient suitcase to be shipped to a closet. He named what was happening without anger, only clarity, and clarity is the sharpest mercy. Memory answered him, unspooling months into a pattern I had refused to see. The kitchen reorganization that made it impossible to find my own spoons. The well-timed remarks about forgetfulness after a phone call derailed my cooking. The gentle suggestions to downsize because of property taxes. though our mortgage had been retired like a faithful worker long ago. The friends I stopped seeing because Lyra didn't want me overstimulated. The small payments I made thinking of them as contributions toward a house I had paid for with decades of mornings and receipts and late-night algebra over bills. Grief had made me soft clay. Lyra's hands were not gentle. On the screen, Richard's voice gathered weight. He said he had prepared for this, not because he wanted to distrust our son, but because love that refuses to plan is not love. It is wishful thinking with a blindfold on. He spoke slowly, the way he did when explaining a system anyone could understand if they started from the truth. He had arranged our affairs, recorded what mattered, and placed tools where I could reach them when I was ready to use my hands again. He did not speak of revenge. He spoke of protection, of dignity, of the right to finish one's life in a house built on vows and ordinary miracles. Lyra shifted, the leather chair whispering under her. The confidence that had strutted in beside her was now searching for a new coat to wear. Darren finally looked at me with the face of the boy who used to run to my bed during storms. Then back at the screen, as if his father might forgive him if he memorized every word. Mr. Richardson kept his expression professional, but he had the look of a man who knows where the staircase is in a burning building. Richard leaned closer to the camera, and the office air felt charged the way air feels before rain. He said there were documents that changed the shape of everything we thought we knew, and that their meaning would be explained in full. He asked me to listen carefully. He asked the room to remember what respect sounds like. The lawyer reached to pause the video so he could lay the first papers on the table. And the clock ticked once, then again. Like a drum leading into a march, I had finally decided to join. Richard's words still lingered in the air when Mr. Richardson laid the first document flat across the table. His voice was calm but precise. The voice of someone used to untangling complicated knots without fraying the rope further. 18 months ago, he explained, Richard had established a revocable living trust. The house, the savings accounts, the investments, none of them sat in the vulnerable balance Lyra believed she controlled. They belonged to the trust, with me as both primary beneficiary and trustee. In simple terms, the home I thought was slipping through my fingers was in fact anchored securely in my hands. Lyra let out a sharp laugh, brittle and nervous. That can't be legal, she snapped. You can't just cut out family. Mr. Richardson raised his eyes to her with polite detachment. It's entirely legal. Your father-in-law consulted multiple attorneys to ensure every provision would stand against challenge. He tapped the signature line where Richard's name curved in ink like a seal of faith. I looked at the page, barely able to comprehend what it meant, though I could see Lyra's face losing its color with each syllable. Darren's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests. Silent. A man realizing the script he had rehearsed was no longer valid. The television screen flickered again, Richard's voice carrying us forward. He spoke of conditions written into the trust if I were ever threatened with forced relocation or mistreated by family. Those responsible would forfeit all inheritance, not only from the house, but from everything. The words settled into the room like stone. For months, I had been convinced I was powerless, a guest in my own life. Now, in a matter of minutes, the balance had shifted so completely that it was almost dizzying. Lyra tried to speak, but her voice failed her, a strangled whisper dissolving in her throat. Richard went on. He spoke of overhearing conversations in the hospital corridor, the very night before his final surgery. He had heard Lyra plotting to place me in a nursing home even before his heart stopped beating. My stomach clenched with the memory of that night, the vending machine coffee, the sterile hallway, the way I thought grief was still an abstraction waiting in the distance. Richard had known then what I would only learn months later, that kindness could be counterfeit, and loyalty could be bargained away when convenience offered a higher bid. Darren shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping across his features like a shadow finally acknowledged. The lawyer paused the video again to explain further provisions. He described something Richard had called the nuclear option. If I was ever coerced, insulted, or treated as a burden, I could revoke their inheritance entirely, demand repayment of funds, and reclaim property misappropriated under false pretenses. My breath caught when he listed the amounts: $15,000 for bathroom renovations, $8,000 for appliances, $24,000 in so-called mortgage contributions. Nearly $50,000 siphoned from me under the guise of shared responsibility. Lyra's composure cracked, panic rising like water behind a brittle dam. "This is insane," she cried. "You can't demand repayment for living expenses." Mr. Richardson's reply was steady. "You weren't tenants. You were deceiving a homeowner. Back rent alone could exceed $43,000. I pressed a hand to my mouth. The betrayal was deeper than I had admitted to myself. All this time, I had feared becoming a financial burden, only to discover they had been using my grief to fatten their accounts. My voice trembled, but it was stronger than it had been in months. "You knew, Darren. You knew she was throwing away your father's belongings, making me feel confused, treating me like I was fading. You let it happen." Darren opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to summon words. The boy I had raised with such care was gone, replaced by a man who had mistaken passivity for peace. Mr. Richardson reached again into the envelope and produced a thick journal. Richard documented everything. He said, dates, times, conversations overheard, even witnesses when possible. The notebook lay on the table like evidence in a trial none of us had agreed to attend. Lyra recoiled, and Darren buried his face in his hands. Richard's voice returned one last time before the video paused for good. "Sweetheart, you are stronger than you know. If they show you respect, you may forgive them, but if they do not, use the power I've given you. Never let anyone make you feel powerless again." The room fell into silence, heavy and unbroken, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I reached for the envelope one last time and drew out a personal letter written in Richard's hand. "My dearest Glenda," it began. Tears blurred the words, but I forced myself to read every line. He told me I was not weak, not confused, not disposable. He reminded me of every battle I had already survived, of the strength I carried even when I could not feel it, and he ended with a truth I needed carved into my heart. "You owe them nothing except what they earn through respect and kindness. They haven't earned anything." I folded the letter carefully and looked around the table. Lyra's eyes burned with panic, Darren's with shame. Margaret stared at her lap, and Tom looked quietly relieved. Mr. Richardson met my gaze with the smallest nod, as though acknowledging a decision only I could make. My voice was steady now, unrecognizable even to myself. "I want them out of my house by the end of the week. I want every penny documented, every debt collected, and I want this finished so I can live my life without fear again. For the first time in years, My words carried the weight of someone who believed them. Lyra's composure shattered completely at those words. She lurched to her feet, tears streaking her mascara, her voice rising in frantic pleas. "Glenda, we're family!" she cried, her hands trembling as though reaching could still tether her to control. "We can fix this. We can work it out." But her tears were not of remorse. They were the desperate tears of someone watching a scheme collapse. "Family doesn't lie," I told her quietly. "Family doesn't threaten to throw each other away like garbage." Darren finally looked at me, shame softening his voice. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to get this far. Please, let me make it right." But the words felt hollow, spoken too late, after too much silence when silence had done the most harm. I gathered my purse and Richard's letter, feeling stronger with each step toward the door. "Mr. Richardson's calm voice followed me. "I'll prepare the necessary paperwork." Lyra sobbed louder, and Darren sat frozen, his face gray with realization. For the first time in 2 years, I walked out of that office not as a discarded woman, but as someone who finally understood her own worth. Behind me, their voices blended into a storm of panic and excuses. But the storm was theirs to weather, not mine. At home that evening, the air felt different, lighter. The walls seemed to exhale, free of the tension that had pressed against them since Darren and Lyra moved in. Yet the kitchen held its reminders. Lyra leaned against the counter, phone in hand, her eyes red but calculating. "Glenda, we need to talk," she said, her tone feigning calm. "No," I replied. "Steady? You need to pack? You have until Sunday." Her mask cracked. "Darren grew up here," she snapped. "You can't throw your own son out." I turned to her, my voice quiet but immovable. "He chose to watch while you humiliated me. He chose to lie about finances. He chose to treat me like a burden. Those were his choices. Now he lives with them." Her voice rose in desperation. "What kind of mother does that? The kind who finally remembers her worth?" I answered, "Love without respect isn't love at all." The door opened, and Darren walked in. His shoulders sagged, his face older than the morning before. "Mom, can we talk?" Lyra's hand shot to his arm, but Darren removed it gently. "Stop," he told her, then turned to me. His voice cracked. "I know I failed you. I know I let her treat you in ways Dad would have hated. Please, give me a chance to make this right." I searched his face for sincerity, but what I found was desperation. The desperation of a man realizing his safety net had been cut. Boundaries and counseling, he offered. A way forward. But my heart had learned to separate apology from true repentance. "When was the last time you defended me?" I asked. "When was the last time you thanked me for all the money I gave you?" Silence answered for him. He had no defense. Lyra tried once more, her tone honeyed but hollow. "Maybe we all made mistakes. Glenda, maybe we can start fresh." I shook my head. "You convinced me I was losing my mind. You made me pay for what was already paid. You threw away Richard's belongings. You threatened me with a nursing home. That wasn't a mistake. That was abuse." Her face twisted, but Darren's expression shifted, as though for the first time he recognized the truth in my words. He lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. At that moment, I realized something essential: pity could not rebuild trust, and guilt could not erase cruelty. What I owed them had already been paid, in sacrifices too numerous to count. What I owed myself was far greater. The days that followed were a blur of movement and confrontation. Boxes lined the hallways. Angry voices spilled from behind closed doors, and tension coiled in every corner. By Sunday, they were gone. Their exit was not graceful. There were tears. There were threats. There were promises that I would regret my decision. But with Mr. Richardson's documents in hand and the trust behind me, their threats had no teeth. For once, the law was on my side, and so was my husband's foresight. The house, silent after they left, finally sounded like home again. Each room breathed freely, carrying echoes of laughter and love rather than control and cruelty. The financial reckoning soon followed. With back rent, fraudulent expenses, and property wrongly taken, the tally came to $127,000. They managed to pay back $23,000 by selling Lyra's car and jewelry. The rest would come in monthly installments over 5 years. A part of me considered forgiveness, but Richard's letter burned in my memory. You owe them nothing except what they earned through respect and kindness. They had earned consequences, not pardon. For once, I allowed myself to stand firmly on the ground I had sacrificed so much to build. 6 months later, the house was mine in every sense of the word. Richard's photographs returned to the mantel, his chipped coffee mug back in the cabinet. The rooms dressed in my choices, not theirs. I reconnected with friends long silenced by discomfort, hosted bridge club once more, and even shared coffee with a kind widower from church who made me laugh. The woman who had nearly been erased had returned, stronger and wiser. Love without respect, I had learned, is just another form of bondage, and dignity is worth more than inheritance, more than appearances, more than keeping peace at the cost of self-respect. The months after their departure unfolded like the slow return of spring after a brutal winter. For the first time in years, I woke to quiet that was truly peaceful, not the strained silence of walking on eggshells. Sunlight fell across the kitchen table where Richard and I had once shared morning coffee, and the space felt like ours again, mine to fill with memory and possibility, not theirs to invade with condescension. I tended to the garden, dusted off family photos, and slowly reclaimed the house room by room. Each corner a reminder of the life I had built and nearly surrendered. But freedom came with echoes. Some nights, as I lay in bed, I still heard Lyra's voice declaring I would end up with nothing, that I belonged in a nursing home. The words stung less now, but they were etched deep, a scar rather than a wound. Richard's letter, tucked safely in my bedside drawer, became my talisman. Whenever doubt tried to creep in, I unfolded those pages and read his unwavering faith in me. You are stronger than you know, he had written, and in those lines, I rediscovered the woman I had been before grief hollowed me out. Then came a call I hadn't expected. One morning, the phone rang, the display showing an unfamiliar number. When I answered, Darren's voice emerged, hesitant and raw. Hello? Mom? My breath caught at the word. We hadn't spoken since he and Lyra left. I braced myself for anger, excuses, demands. Instead, he asked if we could meet for coffee. He told me he'd started counseling on his own, not couples therapy, but sessions to understand how he had lost himself. His words tumbled awkwardly, but they carried something I hadn't heard in years, accountability. He admitted he had become someone his father would have been ashamed of, someone he himself didn't recognize. I listened in silence, remembering the boy he once was and the man he had allowed himself to become. I asked about Lyra, and his answer came halting. They had separated 3 months earlier. She couldn't handle the financial strain or his new refusal to let her belittle me. She had moved in with her sister in Phoenix, leaving him to pick up the pieces of a life they had built on manipulation. For the first time, Darren sounded like he was choosing honesty over excuses. He told me he was continuing to send the monthly repayment checks, not because of obligation alone, but because he wanted to stand behind the consequences of his actions. His voice cracked when he said, "I don't expect forgiveness, Mom, but I needed you to know I understand now what I did to you." I walked to the window as he spoke, looking out at the thriving garden Richard and I had once planted together. Forgiveness, I knew, was not a door one simply opened because someone knocked. It was a long road, paved not with words but with consistent action. Yet hearing Darren's voice, stripped of Lyra's influence, stirred a small ember of hope I hadn't thought possible. When he asked timidly if he could come to dinner on Sunday, I surprised myself by saying yes. "Pot roast," I told him, "the way you used to like it." But I was clear we would be starting from scratch. He would have to earn his place back in my life. He whispered that he understood, and for once, I believed him. The weeks that followed showed me how much had changed. Old friends returned, our laughter spilling across the table where fear had once silenced conversation. My bridge club resumed, and the house rang with the sound of cards, shuffling, and easy camaraderie. I even began volunteering at the local senior center, helping others understand their financial rights. Too many had stories like mine children or spouses exploiting grief, manipulating trust, convincing them they were too weak to stand on their own. Each time I spoke, I saw recognition in their eyes, and I knew Richard's protection had rippled outward into something larger. I wasn't just reclaiming my life, I was helping others guard theirs. Then, one evening, the doorbell rang. A delivery man handed me a package with a return address from Phoenix. Inside lay my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one Lyra had claimed was lost. A note accompanied it, signed by her mother. She explained she had found it among her daughter's things, realized it was never Lyra's, and returned it to me with an apology. I held the necklace in my hands, remembering the day my grandmother fastened it around my neck at my wedding. Instead of anger, I felt pity for Lyra. She had traded family for jewelry, security for schemes, and in the end, she had nothing but the hollow comfort of possessions stolen and returned. Later, I asked my neighbor Helen if she remembered me before all of this. She didn't hesitate. "You were strong," she said, "kind, but never someone people could walk over." I smiled because I felt that woman returning with each day. Standing in front of the mirror that night, I saw the lines and gray hair, but I also saw dignity. I was the woman who had survived widowhood at 24, raised a son alone, worked 2 jobs, and never stopped moving forward. Grief had not broken me. It had only paused me. Now I was moving again, and this time on my own terms. Sunday arrived with the smell of pot roast filling my kitchen, the way it once had on countless family dinners when Darren was still a boy. I set the table with care, Richard's coffee mug on the counter like a silent witness, the pearl necklace resting against my collarbone. When Darren knocked, I opened the door to find him standing awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes uncertain. He looked thinner, older, humbled. For a moment, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Certain they were treasures. Dinner was quiet at first. Darren spoke hesitantly about his counseling. about the ways he had come to see his own weakness. He admitted he had allowed Lyra to dictate his choices because it was easier than conflict. He confessed he had ignored his conscience, telling himself that silence was not betrayal, when in truth it was the deepest kind. I listened, not forgiving yet, but hearing. The words were not a solution, but they were a beginning. When he said he wanted to earn his place back in my life, I told him plainly that words alone would not be enough. Respect and honesty had to prove themselves through time. He nodded, tears bright in his eyes, and for the first time in years, I believed there was a chance for us. However fragile, life moved forward in small but meaningful steps. I attended church with new steadiness, sat with my bridge club laughing over spades and hearts, and spent afternoons volunteering at the senior center. Each time I spoke to another widow or widower about protecting their rights, I felt Richard's hand in mine, guiding me to turn pain into purpose. I told them that grief can make you vulnerable, but vulnerability is not weakness. It is the soil where strength can grow again if you let it. Their nods, their quiet thank yous, became part of my healing. Darren kept coming on Sundays. At first, he stayed for only an hour, cautious, uncertain of how much space he had in my home. But as weeks turned to months, he began to help in small ways, repairing a loose shutter, tending the garden Richard had loved. He never mentioned Lyra except to say their divorce was final. His checks for repayment arrived on time, each with a note of apology or gratitude. Slowly, my anger gave way to measured hope. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the erasure of hurt, but the decision to stop letting hurt dictate every tomorrow. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Lyra herself. She wrote not to apologize, but to accuse, blaming me for the collapse of her marriage, for her financial ruin, for everything she had lost. I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer with Richard's note. For the first time, her words held no power. They were only ink on paper, unable to touch the life I had rebuilt. I realized then that forgiveness was not something I owed her, nor was it something she had earned. It was simply the choice to stop letting her shadow fall across my light. 6 months after that fateful day in the lawyer's office, my life felt both familiar and new. I still missed Richard every morning and every evening, but his absence no longer hollowed me out. His love had become a steady foundation, his foresight a shield, his faith in me a torch that burned brighter with each passing week. Darren was learning to be my son again, not through inheritance or obligation, but through humility and effort. I was learning to be myself again. The woman who had once raised him alone and survived storms without losing her ground. Sometimes I sat on the porch at sunset, watching the light spread across the garden, and thought about everything I had endured. They had tried to convince me I was powerless, but I had discovered the truth. The only person who decides my worth is me. Richard had given me protection. Yes, but in the end, I had chosen to stand up and claim it. That choice was mine alone, and it changed everything. To anyone listening to my story now, I ask you, what would you do if the people you loved turned against you? Would you shrink beneath their betrayal? Or would you find the courage to stand tall again? Respect is not optional in love, it is the foundation. Without it, love becomes manipulation. And the greatest lesson I learned is that dignity is never something you give away. It is something you hold on to, no matter the cost. If this story moved you, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and finding strength when life tests you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to reclaim your power from those who tried to take it? I'd love to hear how far this story has reached.